Hey everyone, welcome to your weekly college basketball bracketology update with America's #1 bracketologist, Bracket Dom of bracketometry.com. He's ranked 124 spots better than ESPN's Joe Lenardi, 178 spots better than CBS's Jerry Palm. So if you're checking out this guys, really, what are you doing? You're just wasting your time, Heading over to at Bracket Dom on X. So if you want to know where your team stands, this is the place to go. This is the guy who gets it right more often than not. So as always, a lot of turmoil in college basketball, although not a lot of turmoil at the top. Seed lines pretty stable, at least at the very top. However, a lot of those teams are going to start challenging each other in conference play. We're about halfway through conference slate now. All the conferences are bigger, and so that the sort of the running into each other takes a little longer sometimes. But since we last spoke, we've had one unbeaten fall by the wayside. Nebraska, as they lost to Michigan on Tuesday in Ann Arbor. But we still have two left, and we're almost to February. It's kind of shocking. So, all right. Well, let's get right into it. Let's reveal this week's brackets, and we'll talk about this. We'll start looking at the one line, and again, not much movement here. We have Arizona as the overall #1 seed, and then followed by Duke, Michigan, and Connecticut.
Yeah, and I think those one seeds are really starting to solidify themselves this year. It's surprisingly early. I would honestly be kind of surprised if that wasn't the 4-1 seeds we saw when the final brackets are released come March. Now, obviously, this is college basketball. Anything can happen in the course of the month, and things surprising you, that's the nature of the sport. But right now, those teams kind of seem far and above the best in terms of resume and just how they're playing right now. The one that I would say is probably most likely to fall off, and I think we've touched on this before, would be UConn. Right. And there was a big opportunity this weekend when they barely edged by Villanova in overtime. Had they lost that one, that could have really opened up the door for someone else to sneak in there. Houston was kind of on the rise for it, but they lost for Texas Tech. Nebraska was on the rise for it, but like we said, they took their first loss at Michigan. Yeah. So even with Connecticut not having the strongest remaining schedule, with the Big East kind of being down this year, it just seems like really those four kind of continuing to win, and the teams behind them that were potentially challenging are continuing to lose. So someone's going to need to make a heck of a push here. Maybe Texas Tech, who just beat Houston, but again, they still have a bit of a hill to climb resume-wise. But the Big 12, if they were to potentially win out, maybe, but it might need something like that for one of those top four to be unseated at this point.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the top four, I think it's, especially when you look at Arizona, it looks like they're pretty much in control of Big 12. I mean, they might drop one or two, but it's hard to imagine them not being in the one line. Duke as well, similar in the ACC. The Big Ten's the one that's got a lot of, you look right now and you have Michigan as a #1 seed. You have Nebraska, Illinois, Michigan State, all as 2 seeds. There's a lot of possibility. There's going to be some Big Ten team as a 1 seed probably, but I think that's probably where you're more likely to see some change. Now, maybe Michigan continues winning. If that's the case, then obviously they stay the 1 seed, but all those teams have really not played each other too much. And so that's going to start happening over the next 4 to 5 weeks. And so that's going to, get itself worked out, I suppose, which then brings us to the 2 line. Aside from the 3 Big Ten teams, you also have Iowa State, which is I guess that would be the one Big 12 team that I guess you could imagine potentially could replace Arizona.
Yeah, and I would honestly say, though, I think you're on to something with the Big Ten. I mean, I think there kind of is more of a gap. If you're thinking like each of the conferences might get one, which sometimes it's obviously not a steadfast rule, but it kind of seems like it might pay out this way. And yeah, and Michigan, like you said, they still have to play Michigan State twice. They still have to play Illinois one time, and they're kind of right behind them with a little bit of a gap, but close enough to where they could certainly take that spot on the one line kind of as the Big Ten representative. And heck, if they lose to one of them, they lose to Michigan State, but they split those games and Michigan State also wins out, maybe the Big Ten could get 2 on that one line and squeeze out UConn just because they don't play an amazing schedule the rest of the way, and maybe they lose a couple of those. So, yeah, I think Michigan State and Illinois certainly are in position, maybe even more of a better position than Iowa State, especially because Iowa State, even though resume-wise they're ahead right now, I'm not sure they're actually a better team than some of the ones behind them, like Texas Tech and Houston. I think it's more likely they fall below those teams than past the ones above them.
Yeah. Well, and I also would think it's probably reasonable to say that, the weird thing that we have in middle of February, we've got Duke playing Michigan, I think a neutral
in
New York. What does that mean? It's hard to know where those teams are going to be come 3 weeks from now. But that could certainly be a very interesting game for seeding to get on the one to get knocked off the one. I suppose it's a 1A game probably for either team, so maybe you don't lose much by playing that game. But anyway, it's kind of.
And that could certainly lead to the scenario where the Big Ten does get to, because say Michigan wins that game against Duke, but then doesn't win the Big Ten. They lose to Illinois and Illinois wins out or something like that. So now you got to keep Michigan up there with that win against Duke. That's one of the best wins anyone has all year. But hey, Illinois beat them and won the Big Ten and has a better Q1 record now. I mean, it's certainly possible. And UConn's the one that squeezed out, or Arizona could lose a few games, even though they seem like such a lock. So we really don't know. It seems like right now it's pretty set, but yeah, a lot of big games coming up left. So the schedule's kind of backloaded this year, so certainly still up in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take a quick look a little further down the field and just look at the 3 and the 4 seed lines. In the 3 seed, we have Purdue, and now this came out 25th. I think you did it. So 2 days ago.
27th, but I believe that was before Purdue had their loss, or their third straight loss. It was after their first 2 in a row, but now that's a 3-game losing streak, and I think they probably would be down to a 4 seed now, and better turn it around quick. If they lose 4 in a row and lose at Maryland, now not only is that 4 in a row, that's actually a bad loss as well on top of the 3 losses they've already taken. So. Yeah, they could certainly fall off quickly, or they could do what Vanderbilt did after they lost their 3 in a row and just absolutely throttle 2 teams in a row, including a good Kentucky team. So important ones coming up for the Boilermakers.
Yeah, they're definitely leaking oil, but nothing could fix that better than Maryland this year, who is they're horrendous. I think Michigan State got them by 43 at home, which is.
I think everyone's getting them by 43. It seems like that's not a good basketball team, unfortunately.
And so, as you mentioned before, at the 3 line, you have Houston lurking there, as well as Texas Tech from the Big 12. You've got Gonzaga up there. On the 4 line is Vanderbilt. Virginia still hanging around. They just squeaked by I think it was Notre Dame a couple of days ago in some crazy double overtime game they probably could have lost. And then BYU, which had a chance, I guess, against Arizona, or to come back and win. And
at the very end, suddenly they had a chance. It didn't seem like it for most of that game. That was a wild finish.
And then Kansas is the last in the 4 seed line. Anyone there worth talking about besides we kind of touched on Purdue, which is just, not looking good right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting just when we're going over all of those top seeds right now, that Vanderbilt, who's the one that's kind of also leaking oil until that bounce back win against Kentucky. They had 3 losses in a row. They're still the only SEC team that's in the current top 4 seeds right now, which
it's crazy.
Which how good the SEC is. I mean, their depth really is good. They're a deep conference. They have good teams, but they just don't really have many of those elite title contenders that I think we talked about this a month ago. Like, I'm sure at this point, one of them will emerge and start winning a bunch of games and start moving up, but they still just all keep beating each other up, and they're just really kind of going to be all over that 5, 6, 7, 8 line if it continues that way. You're going to have a lot of second or win the first tournament game and then lose the second type teams.
Yeah, I feel like the Big Ten had that a couple years ago where they just had a ton of teams like the 3 to 7 or 8 line. They had just as many teams as usual, but they were all very low seeds, and in some respects, good or bad doesn't matter, I guess, as long as you're getting in. But you miss those opportunities to get the easy first round games.
Yeah, and then it makes your conference look bad when, you had all these teams in, but your record was what? You didn't get any of them, only one of them to the Sweet 16. And then you look at the seeds and that's about actually what they were expected to do. You would just think someone would have been higher when you have that many in, but it's warranted. They just have a bunch of middle of the pack teams this year.
And the one last thing to I think highlight is the fact that the Mountain West, you still have 3 teams. So you still have one conference there, one to the non-Power 5 conference with 3 teams squeaking with, we'll talk about New Mexico State in a second, but they're definitely, or New Mexico, they're still hanging in there on the bubble. Well, I guess pretty much almost all 3 teams are in the bubble. I guess you have San Diego State's the last 11, and then you have Utah State as a solid 9.
Yeah, a solid 9, but that's probably about as solid as it's going to get for the Mountain West this year. And the thing is with them, they really don't have any more teams beyond those 3. So if you set the over-under at 2.5 teams making it, I would hammer the under right now, because all it takes is one of them going on a little bit of a cold streak, and there's no one really next in line to take their place like we've seen the Mountain West in the past when they've been so deep. So, yeah, I think one of those will probably fall off, but hopefully, for the sake of that conference, they can at least get 2 in. I do think there's a good chance of that. Just which 2 of those 3 is the question, and you could name any 2 of those 3, and your answer would be as good as mine. It's a crapshoot in that conference right now.
All right, well, let's talk about what everyone loves talking about. That is the bubble.
Yeah.
So we have our last 4. Of course, they've all changed since the last time we spoke, which is kind of sort of what the bubble does. Every week it's going to move around. And I suppose if you do this every day, it is changing pretty much oftentimes by the day, especially as we get closer to selection time. So we have Miami, Cal, Stanford, and New Mexico is the last one in. Here you have 2 ACC teams, California ACC team.
Yeah. Three. The ACC is just all over the bubble.
Yeah, it's bubblicious for the ACC.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this one is that was my last 4 in, and since then, 2 of these teams have actually played. Miami and Stanford just played the other night, and Miami won that one. So that was an absolutely massive game for both teams that if I were to remake that this exact moment, I think Miami would now elevate themselves out of that last 4 in. Still, obviously, not safe. If you're a Miami fan out there listening, don't think, oh, we're in the tournament now, because because now going on Stanford's side, that might end up not looking like a great win down the stretch. They just lost one of their best players in Okpara. And I think they're probably going to just keep tail sliding at this point. It's a big shame for them. They were such a fun team this year. And maybe had they still been able to beat Miami without them, they could have managed to hold on down the stretch. But now they're looking at next week being projected, being outside of the current field. And without your best player, I'm not sure they find a way to get back in. So I think that might be the last time we see Stanford. But it's really a shame because they had such a weird and fun resume, too, that I was curious to see what the committee was going to do with a lot of quality wins and a lot of bad losses. But now I think it's just going to be a lot more bad losses. And hey, it might make it easier on me because that was a hard resume to evaluate.
And
Cal also
a weird one too, right?
But also just weirdly, usually when we talk about these teams, that there hasn't been like massive games for them since this came out. But Cal also just lost at Florida State the other night, and that is not a game that you can lose when you're on the bubble. So if you're a fan of a bubble team that's not in right now, this is just music to your ears. Where Stanford, they're out. Cal, they're out. The Mountain West, New Mexico's in there. And I'm saying one of these 3 Mountain West teams is probably going to be out. Missouri, who was my second team in, just got absolutely blasted in their last game since that bubble came out. So, yeah, those teams that are kind of maybe next 4 out that aren't even on the metric right now, that people complain when my bracket is posted, hey, where's this team? Why aren't they even right now? Just win your next 2 games, and next week there's a great chance you're in the picture because there's a lot of teams falling by the wayside right now.
Well, let's talk about the first 4 out, which of course is 2 days old now, right? You have Ohio State there from the Big Ten. You got Missouri, the aforementioned Missouri. You got Butler from the Big East, kind of just sneaking back into the field, maybe, or right on the edge of it. And then Seton Hall just kind of on the wrong side of it this time.
Yeah, and like we said, a couple of days old, and Butler and Missouri were sneaking their way back in, kind of one big win away from being able to get back in. And since then, Butler went to St. John's and got absolutely rolled, and Missouri went to Alabama and got absolutely rolled. So those teams had their chances. Those are the type of wins that you're a first 4 team out that you can go in and win. And hey, now you're in regardless of what teams above you do. And teams above them were losing too. So it was the perfect resume, but neither came even close to capitalizing on those opportunities. So I think really probably the big winner of the week right now is Ohio State for really doing absolutely nothing, but now just moving into the field by default. They have not played since my update, and they would probably be solidly in now. So, and obviously they got a huge one coming up at Wisconsin this Saturday, but it might be at the point now with the way the rest of the bubble's going. I would have told you when that bracket came out, yeah, they're going to have to win at Wisconsin to get in. Ohio State could pull the wild lose 1 game, and then the next update comes out and suddenly you're in. Which should make no sense because, hey, they were out and they lost and now they're in, but that wouldn't be a bad loss. And if it's a close game, that could be enough to sneak them back in if everyone else around them is just getting rolled or taking much worse losses.
And now also the thing with Ohio State is they don't have any quad one wins yet, right? I mean, that's kind of a strange resume
Yeah,
to.
well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. They have one win. Let me pull up their resume
Oh,
back
yeah.
up, and
Someone just keeps
it's
flirting
crazy.
back and
That's another
forth.
reason they keep going in and out of my field every single week is yeah, that win at Northwestern. That's the one. That is, they're back to 70 in the net, so that is back to being a quad one win. Yeah, there was one week I kept them out, and because they had no quad one wins, which the committee will always punish you for. You pretty much have to have at least one quad one win to get in. And yeah, I think they had like a nothing burger week where they kind of beat some bad teams, but then Northwestern popped back up there in quad one, and hey, now that resume is looking nice to be put back in. That's the fine margin sometimes that you would think and hope the committee would kind of understand that, like, hey, this is a Q1 win, but it barely is one, and it's Northwestern. But the committee is still going to see 1-5 and look at that a lot better than they would look at 0-5. So as much as Northwestern being 1 or 2 spots higher, lower in the net shouldn't have that big of an impact, I think it probably does.
So it's fair to say if you're a Ohio State fan, you're hoping that they get a quad one win somewhere else that's a little more solid. You at least have another one because Northwestern hanging there is
winning. In case you don't, you're a big Northwestern fan.
All right. So this brings us to the big question here. So now we have 2 unbeatens. We've got Arizona and Miami of Ohio continues to win in the MAC.
Yeah.
Both teams are almost undefeated. We're January, as we recorded, this is January 29th. So we're just a few days away from February. I don't remember the last time a team was undefeated going into February, much less 2 teams. I can't even remember if that's even happened. But
either. Yeah, I'm sure it has, but not recently.
Been a long time, probably. Yeah. So, all right. So who do you think lasts longest unbeaten?
I hope it's Miami of Ohio, because it worries me that if they lose like 2 games down the stretch and then lose in the conference tournament, that even with only 3 losses, they could get excluded just since they haven't really played anyone. We'll see what their metrics are. The metrics are good right now. I still think they can afford like a loss down the stretch and a loss in the conference tournament and get in with 2 losses, but just got to hope those losses aren't to someone like really bad that would kill the metrics. And there are a lot of really bad teams in the MAC, but I do think it's going to be them just because they've been playing with absolute fire lately. And their last 3 games, they beat Buffalo in overtime. They won at Kent State in overtime. They came back to beat UMass by 2. It cannot continue, but I mean, hey, maybe it can. Maybe they have some black magic on their side, and they're going to win the national championship, and every single game is going to go to overtime. But I just cannot imagine that being sustainable when you're playing bad teams at home and barely escaping. I think they're just nervous to this point and letting these teams play at their level. I don't know what it is, but they seem like that loss is coming. And Arizona, they legitimately could just win out the rest of the way. They're that good. That is a very good basketball team that, if March started tomorrow, would be my pick to win it all. Obviously, they have a much tougher schedule the rest of the way, being in the Big 12, right, but I think they're good enough to handle it. I'll say Miami of Ohio. Looking at their schedule now, Buffalo is one of those teams they just barely beat in overtime at home. They go on the road to Buffalo in a couple of in their next 2 games. That might be the one where they finally lose. Buffalo seem to have their number, and it might reverse when they have to play them in their home court.
All right, so games we're looking at this weekend now. Excuse me. I'm going to a big game tomorrow night in East Lansing, where Michigan State's going to host Michigan, which, looking at the brackets, you have Michigan State as a 2 seed, but I mean, I imagine if they win that game, it's a 1A game for either team. Doesn't matter where you play, I think, right? In this situation, you're not rewarded.
Yeah, no, that's 1A for both when they're that high. Absolutely.
So
yes.
A win for Michigan State puts them they just switch spots and they move to 1 line and Michigan down to the 2. Would that probably happen? Would you imagine?
It would be very close. I think Michigan could still have an argument to stay on. Michigan State could still have an argument to be a 2, but at that point, it's going to come down to what the metrics do, and just see how much Michigan State really rises. Because the metrics love Michigan right now, and they don't love Michigan State nearly as much. That's why, heck, even a couple of weeks ago, Michigan State was all the way down to a 4, and I felt sick doing that because they're much better than a 4 seed. But again, those predictive metrics had not been a huge fan of them. They're going up lately, though. And if you beat Michigan, and those metrics actually reflect how big of a win that is and the fact that they took them down, I think they could easily take that spot in the one line. And it wouldn't be crazy, though, to see them maybe take UConn's spot and Michigan still stay there, because Michigan still does have a very good resume. But yeah, I'll be very curious to see how the metrics move here. It wouldn't stun me either way. I can't say definitively either way who's going to be a 1, who's going to be a 2 until I see that it would be that close.
Do you find on selection day, do you take into account the fact of how teams are playing towards the end of the season? I feel like in the past that was like an important thing, like, the teams lost 5 in a row or something like that. We're going to put them down a seed line. Do they kind of just get rid of that and just focus on metrics more than they do sort of where, your streaks going into the end of the season?
Yeah, they actually, funny enough, like definitively got rid of that. That's not even like kind of a vibes, it feels like thing. That used to be on the team sheet. Like, you weigh those last 10 games more. And that was something that like was said by the committee. Like, hey, we look at the last 10 games, we weight those more, and that factors into the process. But they've said that they have gotten rid of that. Now, I still think obviously human bias is at play, and a team that finishes the season strong versus finishes the season a little bit weak, if it's close metric wise and quad wins and losses wise, the team that's a little bit hotter is probably going to get that edge. But it's not something they actually definitively argue in the room, like, hey, this team is playing better right now, so they're going to be above. But I still think that comes into the back of their heads when they're ranking the teams in that room.
So what do you have for other games in this week that you're up watching?
Oh, absolutely. I know
you're watching a lot, but
100. I'm watching every single one. But no, this weekend's stacked with some pretty good games. We got BYU, Kansas. That's 2 teams that I have both as top 4 seeds in the Big 12, both on the 4 line right now. So kind of a pendulum swing game. Which one could try to move up a little bit higher? Which one might lose that home uniforms for the first 2 weekends of the tournament, if you want to put it that way. Yeah, and then looking at some others, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, that's always a great game out west anytime they play. And St. Mary's this year is kind of a bit of a bubble team. And it really, outside of Santa Clara, who's decent as well, they're not going to be playing too many other good teams. They might need to get one of those against Gonzaga if they're going to actually stay in. So huge opportunity for them, and one Gonzaga needs as well if they're going to stay up there. And Gonzaga has their typical resume that in the past could get them a 1 or a 2 seed, but just with how stacked these top lines are this year, that's why they're only down to 3. And you lose that one, then suddenly you could be talking about falling a little bit lower without many more chances to get back up. So
sure,
always a big game when they play, just because that's the big rivalry out there. But yeah, an important one for both, maybe even more than usual this year. And one more I'll point out, Texas Tech at UCF. And that's one, you look at the records, you might think, oh, they're both fine. They're both 16-4 in the Big 12, but could end up being a case of teams going in opposite directions. Texas Tech, they're looking fantastic right now. I think they could make a push to get a 2 seed and maybe potentially push for a 1 if they continue playing how well they have been lately. Where UCF, they're kind of that one Big 12 exception team where everyone in the Big 12 is either a contender or out of the field. They're the only one where their resume is kind of in the middle right now. I have them as an 8 seed, and their next 2 games are Texas Tech and Houston. And you lose both of those, then suddenly you're looking at a road game at Cincinnati, where that's a tough place to play. You take a bad loss there, you've lost 3 in a row, and suddenly you're on the bubble. But on the flip side, you beat Texas Tech this weekend. Now you're pretty much almost a lock for the tournament at that point. And now you're just looking at how high you can get. So I think that game, even bigger for UCF, this seems like a game that can turn their season in one of 2 ways, win or lose. And on their home court, prove it and prove that you're the better team. You got no excuses at home.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Again, head on over to Twitter, or I should say X.
I still call it Twitter. I can't.
I know everyone does, right? At Bracket Dom, hit him up. You can ask. He's all the time. He's out there talking about games that are going on and how it's affecting things pretty much daily at this point. Just about.
Oh yeah,
at least one. I'm sure this weekend you'll have 2 or 3 on Saturday, just because there's so many games going on that are important.
Sure. Yeah, and then there might be like a Friday where there's no big games or I don't say anything, and that's just because no games had an impact. It
right, exactly.
Yeah. But this Friday, that's not the case, obviously.
Yeah, I know. I'll be in my sub-zero temperature. I think it's gonna be probably like -1 or 2 degrees, I think, as we go into that game. Fortunately, it's not too far from the parking lot for me.
Yeah.
And it'll be
Man,
a
I've
cold
been
one.
complaining here in Texas that like, oh my gosh, we're in the 20s. How do you deal with this? And that would probably sound fantastic to you right now up there.
It would, although, honestly, usually for at least the nice thing about Michigan is we have the Great Lakes. And so it doesn't usually get very cold. So it is really unusual for us to get to break zero. It almost,
Yeah.
unlike, our friends in Minnesota, Wisconsin, the other side of the lake, it gets really cold over there. So anyway, you can also send an email to bracketdom@gmail.com if you're interested in an interview or want to try and ask questions about your team. We'll definitely get them on the show. Ask away. We're more than happy now that we're getting closer. I mean, we're starting to have some real action going on Bubbles, and we're going to get things going here pretty soon. So hopefully your brackets stay clean. We will see you next week.
See you next week.